Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Tonight, I've got something truly special for you, a soft, slow, and timeless story set in 1930s Vienna. It's called The Cafe That Never Closed. This is the story of a shy artist and a poet who meet night after night in a quiet cafe, a place where time stands still, where candles never burn out, and where every word feels like a dream. So if you're ready to unwind, close your eyes, and drift through the streets of old Vienna, stay till the end. It's going to be a beautiful journey of love, silence, and memory. And hey, if you enjoy these calm historical stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you never miss another quiet night in history. Now, let's begin our story, The Cafe That Never Closed. The rain had been falling since noon, the kind of quiet, endless drizzle that turned the cobblestone streets of Vienna into rippling mirrors of light. Every step sounded like a sigh. The city was slowing down, folding itself into the comfort of warm rooms and flickering lamps. But one man kept walking. Elias Brenner wasn't in a hurry to get anywhere. He never was. With a paint-stained scarf around his neck and a sketchbook tucked under his arm, he drifted through the narrow streets like someone searching for a memory that didn't belong to him. He loved the city most when it rained, when people disappeared indoors, and all that was left were reflections, puddles, and the lonely glow of windows. That's when he saw it. A single cafe, still open. Light spilled through its fogged glass like melted gold. Above the door, a wooden sign swayed softly in the rain, Café Immerlicht, the cafe that never closed. He hesitated, hand on the door. Inside, the faint hum of a piano was playing something slow and unhurried. The kind of music that fills the air like warmth. Elias pushed the door open. The scent of roasted coffee and candle wax greeted him. Tables were half empty, a few regulars whispered over their cups. Behind the counter, an elderly man polished glasses as if time had forgotten him. Everything inside the cafe felt suspended, not alive, not dead, just still. Elias chose a table by the window. Drops of rain chased each other down the glass while the piano's melody drifted from somewhere in the back. He pulled out his sketchbook and began to draw, not the cafe itself, but the feeling of it. The way the candles trembled, the way the air glowed, the way time didn't seem to move. Then, as he lifted his pencil again, he noticed her. In the far corner, a woman sat alone with a cup of coffee gone cold. Her notebook lay open beside her, filled with looping handwriting. Her pen rested between her fingers as if she were waiting for the next sentence to arrive. She looked up, and for the smallest moment, their eyes met. She didn't smile. Neither did he. But something passed between them, something like recognition, or curiosity, or maybe the quiet ache of two people who had both learned to love silence. The clock above the counter ticked softly. The rain didn't stop. Elias turned back to his drawing, but his lines had changed, they curved softer, slower. A face began to appear in the candlelight. Her face. And somewhere behind them, the piano kept playing, as if the cafe itself knew that two stories had just found each other. The next evening, Vienna looked the same, gray skies, soft drizzle, and the gentle glow of lamps flickering through the mist. Elias told himself he wasn't going back to the cafe. He told himself it didn't matter. Yet his feet somehow carried him down the same narrow street, past the same shuttered bookshop and the same puddles shimmering under the dim light. When he reached Café Immerlicht, it was exactly as he remembered, the hum of conversation, the faint clink of spoons, and the warm, honey-colored air that wrapped around you like an old coat. But what drew him in again wasn't the smell of coffee or the comfort of warmth, it was the faint sound of that piano. The same melody. Soft, deliberate, and slow, like rain finding its rhythm on an old tin roof. Elias took his seat by the window, his sketchbook open once more. But he wasn't drawing the cafe tonight. Instead, he tried to capture the sound of the piano, the curve of a note, the shimmer of silence between chords, the quiet breath of someone playing in the dark. That's when he noticed her again. The same woman, in the same corner. Her notebook was open, but her pen wasn't moving. She looked lost in thought, staring not at the page but at the pianist, an older man with silver hair and a weary grace. His hands moved over the keys as if he were speaking a language only he understood. For a long moment, Elias just watched. There was something peaceful about the way her gaze followed the music, like she was listening to a story she already knew. Then, she looked at him. This time, she didn't look away. Her eyes lingered, calm, unafraid, curious. After a breath, she lifted her cup, as if to say hello without a word. Elias hesitated, then nodded back, a small smile ghosting across his lips. When the song ended, the cafe fell silent except for the sound of the clock ticking above the counter. She stood, gathering her notebook and scarf, and for a heartbeat, Elias thought she might walk over. But she didn't. She simply passed his table, leaving behind a faint trace of perfume and a folded napkin. He looked down. A few words were written in delicate handwriting. Music is just what silence looks like when it tries to breathe. Elias turned the napkin over, half expecting a name. There wasn't one. Only the faint ring of her coffee cup, perfectly centered on the paper, like a small, accidental halo. He smiled, slipping the napkin between the pages of his sketchbook. Outside, the rain began again. Inside, the piano started to play a new tune, one Elias didn't recognize. Yet somehow, it felt familiar. Maybe because it was his turn to listen. Maybe because, for the first time in a long while, he wasn't just drawing the world, he was beginning to feel it again. The following afternoon, the rain had stopped. The city looked freshly washed, the air smelled of bread and lilac, and sunlight slid shyly through the clouds. Elias wandered the narrow lanes with his sketchbook tucked under one arm, unsure if he was walking toward anything at all. But as he reached Café Immerlicht, he realized something had already begun inside him, a quiet expectancy, the kind that hums just beneath the ribs. The cafe door creaked as he entered. The same golden light, the same smell of roasted beans, the same sound of slow piano. Only this time, he didn't choose a seat by the window. His eyes found her, at the far end, by the same corner table. She was writing again, her hair falling over her notebook like a curtain of night. Elias felt his chest tighten with something that wasn't quite courage, but close enough. He walked toward her. "Excuse me," he said softly, voice almost blending with the music. "You left this the other night." He placed the napkin on her table, the one with her line about silence and breathing. She looked up, startled at first, then amused. "I wondered where that went," she said. Her voice was low, melodic, touched with the faintest trace of Vienna's accent. "You kept it?" Elias shrugged. "It made me draw differently." That made her smile, not wide, but real. "I didn't think words could change pictures," she said. "Only the right ones," he answered. There was a pause, the kind that could have been awkward in another place, another life. But here, in this cafe that seemed to move at the pace of candlelight, silence was just another way of speaking. She gestured to the chair across from her. "You might as well sit." He did. For the next hour, they didn't talk much. She wrote, he sketched. The waiter brought them coffee refills without being asked, as if the cafe itself understood their rhythm. Outside, the light dimmed to amber. Inside, time drifted like smoke. Finally, she closed her notebook and looked up. "I'm Marin," she said. "I write things. Sometimes poems. Sometimes letters that never find their way." "Elias," he replied. "I paint. Or try to." Marin tilted her head. "Maybe we both chase ghosts, then." He smiled at that, the first real smile he'd felt in weeks. They talked a little longer, about nothing and everything, the smell of rain, the shape of old buildings, the way Vienna's river looked at dawn. Her voice was soft, but her thoughts were bright, full of tiny sparks that lit up the quiet between them. When she finally stood to leave, she reached into her notebook, tore out a page, and slid it across the table. "For your sketchbook," she said. He waited until she was gone before opening it. It was a short poem, no title, just 4 lines written in her graceful hand. "There's a place between night and morning, where stories rest their eyes. If you listen long enough, you might hear your own heart reply." Elias read it twice, then looked toward the empty doorway. The sound of her footsteps had already faded, but her words lingered, like music caught between dreams. He placed the poem beside his drawing, both unfinished, both waiting. And outside, the last of the evening light touched the cafe windows, soft, golden, endless. Weeks passed quietly after that first conversation. Vienna was sliding into late autumn, a city of gray mornings and soft golden evenings. The cafe on the corner still glowed every night, like a lantern that refused to go out, no matter how cold the air grew. Elias returned often, sometimes with purpose, sometimes just to sit and listen. The same seat by the window, the same cup of coffee that always went cold before he finished it. It wasn't habit exactly, more like a quiet agreement between his heart and the hour. Marin came most nights too. Sometimes she wrote. Sometimes she read. And sometimes she just stared out the window, eyes lost in the drifting fog, as if she could hear something the rest of the world had forgotten. They didn't always speak. But they didn't need to. A few words across the table, a half-smile when the piano started playing, it was enough. The silence between them was never empty. It was warm, filled with small, invisible things, the swirl of steam from their cups, the faint scratch of pen on paper, the gentle ticking of the cafe's clock. Outside, the world kept changing, new posters on the walls, new faces rushing through the rain, new rumors whispered in alleys. But inside Café Immerlicht, time had its own slow heartbeat. One evening, as Elias was sketching the soft bend of Marin's wrist while she wrote, she looked up suddenly. "You draw everything," she said. "Even the silence." Elias looked at her, then at the paper. "It's the only thing that doesn't move too fast." Marin smiled, her eyes drifting to the window. "That's why I write at night. The world is quieter when no one's watching." "Do you ever show anyone what you write?" he asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. "No. Words are different when they belong to someone else. They start behaving. Elias chuckled softly. I know that feeling. Outside, a tram bell rang in the distance. A boy ran past the window with a bouquet of wilted flowers. Somewhere, a violin started playing, faint, echoing through the street like a dream that refused to wake. Inside the cafe, everything felt suspended again, just as it had the first night he walked in. Two people sitting at separate corners of the same quiet universe, both chasing something invisible. And as the piano began to play its nightly tune, Marin whispered, "This cafe, do you ever wonder if it sleeps?" Elias looked around, the flickering candles, the gentle clatter of cups, the steady hum of life wrapped in calm light. "No," he said. "I think it dreams instead." The first snow arrived early that year. It didn't come with thunder or warning, just small, hesitant flakes drifting through the night, settling on rooftops and the brim of Elias's hat as he crossed the street toward Café Immerlicht. He paused outside before entering. Through the fogged glass, the café glowed like a painting, candles flickering, soft shadows leaning toward each other, the same pianist playing the same unhurried melody. But what made him smile, just slightly, was the small figure near the back corner, Marin, already there, already writing. When he stepped inside, the bell above the door chimed softly, like it recognized him. "You're late," Marin said as he reached her table. Elias raised an eyebrow. "I didn't realize we had an appointment." She smirked. "Neither did I. But I waited anyway." The waiter brought coffee without asking, dark, strong, steaming. The smell alone was enough to warm the space between them. They sat there for a while, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. The candle between them flickered as the pianist began another tune, slower tonight, like the city itself was breathing in sync. Marin broke the quiet first. "Do you ever think about how many stories this place must hold?" Elias leaned back, studying the room. "Hundreds, maybe thousands. And most of them forgotten." "Not forgotten," she said softly. "Just waiting for someone to listen." He nodded, watching the reflection of the flame dance in her eyes. "Maybe that's what you're doing then, listening for the stories that time misplaced." She smiled. "Maybe that's what you're doing too, painting what time forgot." He didn't answer right away. The truth was, she wasn't wrong. Since meeting her, his sketches had changed, lighter strokes, slower lines, like his hands had finally learned how to breathe. When their cups emptied, the waiter quietly refilled them. Outside, snow kept falling, steady, patient, and silent. The cafe seemed to exist inside a snow globe, sealed away from everything except warmth. Elias reached for his sketchbook. "Would you mind if I?" She shook her head. "Go ahead." He began to draw her, not her exact likeness, but the feeling of her presence, the tilt of her head, the soft shadows under her eyes, the way her fingers curled protectively around her pen. Marin watched, curious and amused. "You make it look like I belong here," she said. He looked up briefly. "You do." For a long time, that was all either of them said. The candles burned lower, the music slowed, and the world outside vanished into white. Then, just before closing her notebook, Marin whispered, "Promise me something." Elias looked up. "What?" "When the cafe closes, if it ever does, promise you'll still draw." He smiled faintly. And you'll still write? She nodded. Even if no one reads it. He held her gaze, the candlelight flickering between them like a heartbeat. Then I promise. And for the first time, it felt like the cafe itself exhaled, its warmth wrapping around them, sealing that promise inside the soft hush of snow. By late December, Vienna had turned to glass. The streets were pale and glittering, the rooftops glowed faintly under layers of snow. The air carried the scent of smoke and roasted chestnuts, and every window seemed to hold a small, trembling light. Inside Café Immerlicht, time moved slower than ever. The regulars came and went, leaving their laughter and footprints behind. But two figures never really left, Elias and Maren, sitting near the back corner, surrounded by sketches, scraps of poetry, and the faint hum of a piano that never stopped playing. The owner had started keeping a candle for them, always burning on their table, a small sign of quiet affection. He called them the night guests, because they never came in the day, and they never really said goodbye. That evening, Maren arrived first. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her gloves, dusted with snow. She ordered 2 coffees without thinking, as if she already knew he was on his way. Elias entered moments later, brushing flakes from his coat, his scarf trailing color through the dim light. He smiled when he saw her, and she returned it, small and soft. They didn't need words. They never did. I brought something, Elias said, pulling a rolled canvas from his coat. Finished it last night. Maren leaned closer as he unrolled it across the table. It was a painting of the cafe, the golden lamps, the fogged windows, the slow swirl of steam above the cups. But what caught her breath wasn't the place. It was the 2 blurred figures sitting near the back, one writing, one sketching, almost hidden, almost glowing. "It's us," she whispered. "Not exactly," Elias said. "Just what it feels like when we're here." She looked at the brushstrokes, the light, the softness in the colors. "You made it look like the cafe is alive." "Maybe it is," he said. "Maybe that's why it never closes." For a long while, they just sat there, side by side, watching the snow fall through the window. The world outside looked far away, a dream moving in slow motion. The piano played something quiet and slow, a tune neither of them knew but somehow recognized. Then, softly, Maren said, "You ever wonder what happens when stories end?" Elias didn't answer immediately. He looked at the candle between them, its flame dancing like a heartbeat in the still air. "They don't," he said finally. "They just keep whispering in new ways." Maren smiled, that tired, peaceful kind of smile that comes only when you feel safe. When the hour grew late, the waiter dimmed the lamps and the pianist closed his cover. Snow pressed against the window like a curtain of white. Elias reached for his coat, but Maren stayed seated, watching the last candle flicker down. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Elias paused. "What?" "The snow," she said. "It sounds like it's falling slower tonight." He listened, and for a moment, he thought he did hear it. The faint, rhythmic hush of flakes meeting earth. The heartbeat of a city asleep. Maren whispered, "Maybe that's what love sounds like when no one's awake to hear it." Elias didn't reply. He didn't need to. He just reached out, placed his hand gently over hers, and together they sat, 2 dreamers in a timeless cafe, listening to the soft, endless music of falling snow. Outside, Vienna slept. Inside, The candle burned a little longer than it should have. Winter lingered longer than anyone expected. The city wore frost like lace, even the river seemed to move slower, as if reluctant to disturb the quiet. Inside Café Immerlicht, candles burned early, and the pianist had switched to softer melodies, the kind that felt like old letters being opened in slow motion. Elias had started leaving sketches behind. Tiny things, a cup, a chair, a window edge, drawn in pencil on scraps of paper and tucked beneath the sugar jar. He didn't plan it, it just became a habit. Maybe he wanted to see if the cafe remembered him when he wasn't there. One evening, when he arrived, he found something new at their table. A folded napkin, plain, waiting. He opened it, and there it was. A single line, written in Marin's handwriting. I missed the sound of pencils against paper. He smiled, slipping the note into his sketchbook. That night, he left one in return. It's quieter when you're not here. The air forgets how to listen. From that night on, it became a secret conversation. Words and drawings passed between them like gentle ghosts, notes left under cups, doodles beneath saucers, poetry scribbled on napkins. Some were playful, some tender, some just small observations. The snow looked like sugar today. The lamplight feels like it's humming. Do you think memories have a scent? Each message was simple, but together, they formed something else, a rhythm, a pattern, a kind of love that refused to name itself. The cafe had become their world. The rest of Vienna, the noise, the rumors, the change, all of it faded when they were there. In a city full of words, they had found a way to speak without speaking. One night, Marin caught him reading one of her older napkins, smiling at it as if it were a secret. Do you keep them all? She asked softly. Every one, he said. She looked down, a blush of warmth crossing her face. You shouldn't. Why not? Because then I might never stop writing them. He met her eyes. Then I'll never stop collecting them. The pianist began to play again, slow and aching. Outside, the snow was gone, replaced by soft rain. But inside, the candlelight glowed steady, as if protecting something fragile and true. The rain had stayed for days. The cafe windows were fogged so thick that the outside world became a watercolor, soft, trembling, undefined. Inside, the world was smaller, warmer. Cups clinked softly, the old record player hummed, and Marin and Elias sat in their familiar corner, the one that smelled faintly of roasted beans and cinnamon dust. Between them lay an open notebook, one they now shared. At first, it had been just for sketches and notes about the cafe. But slowly, it had turned into something else, a quiet exchange of thoughts they couldn't say aloud. Do you think people meet at the wrong time? She had written once, in neat slanted script. Maybe, he'd replied, but sometimes wrong times are just disguised beginnings. They didn't look at each other while writing. It was easier that way. The words were bolder on paper than in air. Marin had begun writing little poems, the kind that read like secrets meant only for one person. One morning, Elias found one waiting for him. Your voice is a candle I never light. Yet somehow, it warms the night. He didn't say anything when she came in. He just slid a small drawing toward her, a candle, barely lit, its smoke curling like a question. Marin smiled softly. You drew this for me? For your poem, he said. It deserved light. She looked at the candle on the page for a long time before whispering, "You make silence sound safe." For a while, neither spoke. The cafe breathed for them, quiet, steady, timeless. Outside, the street musicians had gone home, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Inside, two people sat inches apart, talking in the only language that didn't scare them, ink and paper, eyes and pauses. As the night deepened, Marin flipped to a fresh page and wrote something new. "If I ever stop coming here, will you still write to me?" Elias hesitated. His pencil hovered, uncertain. He looked at her, but she was already watching the rain. He wrote, slowly, carefully. "I'd keep writing until the rain stopped. Even if it never does." Marin read it, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Then maybe I hope it never stops." The pianist began playing Clair de Lune. The lights dimmed, and outside, the rain softened to a hush. The cafe, their little world of napkins and notes, held them in a silence so full it almost sounded like love. The first thing Marin noticed was the silence. The piano wasn't playing. The cafe, always filled with the gentle hum of melody, felt strangely hollow. Herr Klaus, the old pianist who played every evening, had fallen ill. The owner said he might not return for a while. And so, the cafe, their cafe, felt different. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy. Elias sat alone at their table when she arrived, his sketchbook open but empty. The candle between them flickered uncertainly, like it too wasn't sure whether to stay or go. "You're early," she said softly, removing her gloves. He nodded. "Couldn't sleep." Marin smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Neither could I." For a long time, they said nothing. The rain outside had stopped, but the air smelled of damp cobblestone and memory. "Do you ever think about leaving Vienna?" Marin asked suddenly. Her voice was low, like she was afraid of her own question. Elias looked up. "Why would you?" She hesitated. "My father wrote. He's asking me to come back home. To help with the shop." The words landed between them like a drop of ink on clean paper, spreading, impossible to erase. Elias's hand tightened around his pencil. "That's far from here, isn't it?" "Far enough," she said. "He's getting older. I can't keep pretending I don't hear his letters." He nodded slowly. "And what about our letters?" Her breath caught. "Maybe they'll have to become longer." The candle flickered again. Neither of them spoke for a while. The absence of the piano made every heartbeat louder, every silence sharper. Finally, Elias stood. "Wait here." He went to the corner, where the old record player sat beneath a velvet cloth. He turned the handle gently, wound it just enough, and placed the needle. The first notes of Clair de Lune whispered through the air, soft, crackling, imperfect. But it was music again. He returned to the table, eyes lowered. "For when the music pauses," he said. Marin blinked back a tear. "And when it stops completely?" He looked at her then, truly looked, and whispered, "Then I'll hum." The record spun slowly, filling the empty spaces between them. Outside, Vienna's lamps glowed against the mist, and inside, two souls sat with words they couldn't say, a melody that was theirs alone. When Marin left Vienna, it did not rain. The sky was a pale watercolor of gray and rose, and the streets were quiet, as if the city itself had decided to hold its breath. She didn't tell Elias the exact day she would go, she couldn't. Saying goodbye had never been their language. The cafe remained open, of course. The same small tables, the same soft smell of roasted beans. Only now, when Elias came in, her seat was empty, but her silence still lingered like perfume in the air. He began writing to her every Sunday morning. Not long letters, just small notes, folded into envelopes that carried his sketches. A lamppost under snow. A steaming cup left untouched. A candle half burned. He sent them to her father's address. Weeks passed before the first reply arrived. Her handwriting was the same, elegant, slanted, calm. "The days are quiet here," she wrote. "Sometimes I walk to the postbox only to imagine your letters waiting for me. The shop smells of leather and dust. I miss the sound of rain against cafe glass." Elias smiled faintly, tracing the ink with his thumb. He read it again before tucking it into the sketchbook, the same one they once shared. From then on, their letters became a rhythm, slow, steady, dependable. A different kind of music. "I heard a street violinist today," he wrote once. "He played out of tune, but for a moment, I thought it was our pianist." "I painted the cafe from memory," she replied. "But every time I tried to draw your hands, the lines blurred." Time softened everything. Weeks turned to months. The seasons folded into one another like pages of a long letter that never truly ended. Sometimes, Elias wondered if she would return. Sometimes, he didn't, because longing itself had become a kind of comfort, a gentle ache he no longer wished away. Every night, he still sat by the window. The same candle, the same table. And even though the chair across from him stayed empty, he always placed a second cup of coffee there. He would look at it and whisper, "For when she comes back." And outside, as if the sky remembered, it would begin to rain again. Winter arrived quietly that year. The wind carried the smell of snow through Vienna's narrow streets, and the cafe windows began to frost around the edges like old photographs. Elias sat alone, as always, by the corner table. The same candle. The same cup of coffee cooling slowly beside him. Only this time, there was something missing, a letter. It had been 5 weeks since the last one. He checked the post every morning, even when he told himself he wouldn't. The sound of the postman's footsteps became a small kind of heartbreak. He would take long walks through the city to ease his restlessness, the art galleries, the bridges, the markets where painters still sold portraits to strangers. But every face he saw seemed to wear her absence. At night, he returned to the cafe, ordered 2 coffees as always, and sketched. Sometimes the sketches turned into landscapes she had once described, the small lake near her father's shop, the color of the hills behind it, the red scarf she said she wore when it snowed. One night, as he was closing his notebook, the pianist, now returned, though slower in movement, asked, "You still wait for her?" Elias smiled faintly. "You make it sound like waiting is optional." The old man chuckled. "Ah, then you are still in love." He didn't answer. But in truth, love had changed shape. It was no longer a fire, it was a candle that refused to go out. The next morning, when the letter finally arrived, it was thin, hesitant, as if it had lost some of its courage on the way. "I wanted to write sooner," Marin said, "but the days have been heavy. Father is unwell, and I've taken over the shop. Sometimes, I think I hear the cafe's doorbell when I close my eyes. Maybe that's how memory works, it doesn't leave, it just waits with us. Elias read the letter 3 times, his eyes blurring by the end. He didn't realize he was smiling until he saw his reflection in the cafe's glass, a quiet man, warmed by ink and distance. That night, he wrote back only one line. "I'll keep the candle burning until you tell me to stop." Then he sealed the envelope and walked through the snow to the post box. His footprints disappeared behind him almost instantly. When he returned to the cafe, the candle still burned, a small golden heartbeat in the winter dark. By the time the snow began to melt, the cafe smelled of tulips. Someone had placed a vase near the window, and the soft yellow petals caught the sunlight like a promise that winter was finally loosening its grip. Elias hadn't seen Marin in nearly a year. Yet somehow, her presence lingered in the air, in the way the piano drifted through slow melodies, in the empty cup he still ordered for her, in the letters tucked neatly inside his sketchbook. It was early morning when the post finally arrived. Among the usual bills and blank envelopes, there was one, cream paper, blue ink, the handwriting he could recognize from miles away. The postmark read March 12th. The edges were smudged, as if it had traveled through rain. He tore it open carefully. "Elias," it began. "The snow here has melted too. The hills are green again, and I finally saw the first violets near the stream. Father is recovering, and he insists I go back to painting. He says I look at the world as if I've lost something, and perhaps I have. But lately, I dream of Vienna, of the cafe, of candles, of letters that smell like coffee and rain." Elias smiled faintly. The sunlight slid across his table, touching the rim of her empty cup. "I don't know when," she continued, "but I think I'll come back soon. I want to see the city again. I want to hear the piano, to walk by the river, and to see if the candle still burns." Elias folded the letter gently, his hands trembling with quiet disbelief. He looked out the window. The street beyond was still wet from last night's rain, shining, alive. When the pianist arrived, Elias asked him to play something bright, something new. The old man laughed softly. "Bright? You never ask for bright." "Today I do," Elias said. "It feels like spring." The music began, not Clair de Lune, not the sad songs of winter, but a lilting waltz that filled the cafe with a tender kind of joy. For the first time in months, Elias didn't sketch. He just sat there, letting the melody wash over him, imagining her walking down the cobbled street, perhaps even now, the wind tugging at her scarf. Outside, a small bird landed on the window ledge. The candle flickered once, then steadied, as if it too knew that something beautiful was returning. The cafe door had always creaked the same way. A small, drawn-out sound, like an old violin string. Elias had heard it thousands of times, but on that morning, it made him lift his head a little faster than usual. The bell above the door chimed once. A gust of soft spring air entered, carrying the scent of rain and lilacs. She stood there, Marin. Different, yet entirely the same. Her hair was shorter, her coat a shade lighter, but her eyes, they still carried the same quiet warmth, like candlelight that had traveled far and finally come home. Elias didn't stand at once. For a moment, he simply looked, afraid that if he moved too quickly, the scene might dissolve. Marin smiled, just enough for her eyes to crinkle. "You kept my coffee waiting." He let out a breath that sounded like a laugh. "I didn't want it to get cold." She walked over, and every step felt like time rewinding, through snow and letters and silence, until she was standing across from him again, her gloved hand resting on the table. The pianist, noticing her, smiled from the corner. Without a word, he began to play Clair de Lune. The notes floated through the café, soft and nostalgic, wrapping around them like an old memory finding its shape again. Maren sat down. "It feels smaller," she said quietly. Elias nodded. "Or maybe we got bigger." She looked out the window. "Do you still sketch?" "Every day," he replied. "But only from memory." The café. The light. The chair that was always empty. Her eyes softened. "You make it sound like I never left." "You didn't," he said simply. For a while, they sat in silence. Not the heavy kind that comes from distance, but the light, comfortable kind that comes when distance has been forgiven. When the waiter brought their coffee, Maren lifted her cup, her fingers trembling just slightly. "To coming back," she said. Elias raised his cup, the candlelight dancing between them. "To never leaving." The bell above the door chimed again as a few strangers came in, but for them, time had already stopped. The café, their café, was once again what it had always been, a place that never closed, not really, not in their hearts. Outside, the city moved gently, unhurried, as if it too was waiting to see what would happen next. That evening, the café felt fuller, not with people, but with presence. The same piano played in the background, slow and steady, while the candle on their table burned lower, its flame steady and patient. For the first time in months, Elias didn't bring his sketchbook. He wanted nothing between them, no pencil, no pages, just the sound of her voice filling the spaces where silence had once lived. They talked softly, as if trying not to disturb the air around them. About the shop, her father, the changing seasons, and how even rain sounds different in different towns. "I missed this sound," Maren said, tapping her cup gently. "What sound?" Elias asked. "The sound of coffee being shared." He smiled. "Then I missed it too." Their laughter, small, almost shy, filled the café like sunlight sneaking through curtains. Elias noticed how her hands moved when she spoke. She still traced invisible shapes in the air when searching for words, as if her thoughts were sketches she could almost see. "You still do that," he said softly. "Do what?" "That thing with your hands, like you're drawing the sentences before you say them." She blushed slightly. "I forgot you noticed things like that." "I didn't forget," he replied. "I remembered everything." The candle flickered then, casting their shadows onto the wall, two outlines sitting close, their movements slow, unhurried. Outside, Vienna glowed under the evening lamps. Carriages passed, laughter drifted faintly from the street, and the café remained a small island of peace. At one point, Maren grew quiet. She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "You wrote that you'd keep the candle burning." "I did," Elias said. "And did you?" He nodded. "Every night." Her eyes shimmered. "Then maybe it wasn't the candle that kept burning, maybe it was you." Neither of them spoke after that. The music filled the silence, and it didn't need to be broken. They stayed until closing time, their words growing softer, their smiles longer, their hearts finally in the same room again. When they stepped outside, the rain had started, light, playful, the kind that carries no sadness, only memory. Marin tilted her face up toward it and whispered, "Vienna still remembers us." Elias looked at her and said quietly, "The cafe never forgot." It was a slow Sunday morning when they met again. The cafe was almost empty, sunlight spilling lazily through the window panes, dust motes drifting like tiny ghosts of music. The pianist wasn't there yet, but the air still hummed with a faint melody, the kind that only exists between two people who found their rhythm again. Marin sat by the window, reading a small poetry book she had bought from a street vendor. Her coffee had gone cold, but she didn't seem to notice. Elias, sitting across from her, had a napkin under his hand and a pencil between his fingers. He hadn't meant to draw. It just happened. Her face, caught in the light, her eyes half hidden behind the curls that fell over them, her lips curved in that almost smile, the one that had waited through seasons. When he finished, he looked down at what he'd made, not a perfect likeness, but something gentler, truer. It was her, as seen through memory and love. He folded the napkin quietly and slid it across the table. "What's this?" she asked, smiling. "Something that belongs here," he said. "And to you." She unfolded it carefully. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Her eyes moved over the lines, the shading, the faint pencil smudges that felt like fingerprints. "It's me," she whispered. But softer. "It's how I saw you, even when you weren't here," he said. Her voice trembled just a little. "You make me look like a dream." Elias smiled faintly. "You were one." She folded the napkin again, smaller this time, and tucked it gently into her book of poems. "Then I'll keep it," she said, "to remind me that dreams sometimes walk back through doors." They both looked at the candle, the same one that had burned every night, every season, for every letter. Its flame was low, golden, steady. Marin reached out and placed her hand near it, the warmth brushing her skin. "It's still burning," she said softly. Elias nodded. "It always will." Outside, the first cherry blossoms had started to bloom along the river. The air smelled faintly of sugar and rain, and somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed noon, a sound that no longer meant time passing, but time returning. They stayed until the cafe grew busy again, their cups empty but untouched, their hearts full and quiet. Before leaving, Marin turned back to look one more time at the table, at the candle, at the seat where their story had waited. It felt like the end of something, but more than that, it felt like the start of something gentler, endless, and new. Summer arrived softly that year. The rain came less often, and when it did, it was warm, the kind that left the air smelling of lilacs and river water. The cafe's windows were always open now, letting sunlight spill onto the wooden floorboards. Elias and Marin had fallen into a rhythm again, one made of simple things, morning walks, shared breakfasts, and quiet hours spent together in the corner of the cafe. Every morning, Marin brought fresh flowers for their table. Sometimes daisies, sometimes violets. "They make the coffee look happier," she'd say, smiling. Elias would sketch while she read her poetry book, occasionally glancing up to watch how the light moved across her face. He had stopped drawing from memory, now, everything he needed was right in front of him. One morning, as he shaded the curve of her hand, she said, "You know what I think?" "What?" he asked, not looking up. That cafes like this one are alive. He chuckled softly. Alive? Yes, she said, stirring her coffee. They breathe. They listen. They remember. Every time someone laughs or cries or falls in love here, it stays, like the scent of cinnamon in coffee that never fades. Elias looked around. The same tables, the same piano, the same sunlight playing across the floor. Maybe that's why it never closes, he said. It doesn't want to forget. She smiled, tilting her head. So we're part of its memory now? I think we always were. Outside, the street musicians played near the fountain, their music drifting through the open window, cheerful, clumsy, alive. A small boy chased pigeons, and an old couple held hands as they crossed the street. The world, for once, seemed content to move slowly. Elias reached across the table and brushed a strand of hair from Marin's face. You know, he said softly, I used to think waiting was the hardest part. And now? He smiled. Now I think it was what led me here. She placed her hand over his and whispered, then maybe everything was right on time. The piano started playing, not melancholy this time, but a bright, playful tune. Sunlight flickered across their faces, and the scent of fresh bread drifted from the kitchen. The cafe, as always, breathed with them, steady, alive, eternal. Outside, the city glimmered in gold, and for the first time in a long while, they both felt that maybe love didn't need grand moments, just mornings like this, and a table that never forgot their names. It started with a single scrap of paper. One slow afternoon, the cafe was almost empty. The usual hum of conversation had softened into the faint clink of spoons and the sound of a clock ticking behind the counter. Sunlight poured through the big front window, turning the dust in the air into tiny floating stars. Marin was sitting by herself, waiting for Elias. She had her notebook open but couldn't bring herself to write poetry that day. Instead, she tore out a small square of paper and wrote 3 simple words. You are enough. She folded it neatly and tucked it into the corner of the window frame, just beside the entrance. Then she smiled, quietly, to herself, as if she'd just left a secret for the world to find. When Elias arrived, coffee in hand, he noticed her soft grin. What mischief are you up to now? Nothing, she said innocently, eyes sparkling. But the next morning, when they came back, the note was gone, replaced by another, written in a stranger's hand. Thank you. I needed that. Marin gasped. Elias, look. She pointed, her eyes wide with wonder. He read it and smiled. Seems someone heard you. The cafe owner, Frau Kappel, noticed too. People like little kindnesses, she said as she wiped down a nearby table. They spread faster than gossip. So Marin wrote another. Then another. Each day, a new message appeared in the window. Sometimes from her, sometimes from someone else. The rain will stop soon. You're not alone. Dreams don't expire. Soon, the cafe's front glass became a mosaic of words, folded papers, torn napkins, even bits of receipts covered in messy handwriting. People came not just for coffee anymore, but to read the notes, to add their own, to feel something gentle in a noisy world. Elias began sketching them, strangers smiling as they read, couples standing shoulder to shoulder, children pointing at colorful scribbles. His sketches captured the cafe's quiet revolution, how kindness, once whispered, could fill a whole room. One evening, as the cafe lights dimmed and the air turned golden, Maren leaned close and said, "You know, I think this is what art really is, not paintings or poems, but moments that make people feel seen." Elias nodded slowly. "And maybe," he said, "the cafe never closes because people keep leaving pieces of themselves behind." They stood at the window together, looking at the collage of notes fluttering softly against the glass. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the tiny miracle blooming in one quiet corner of Vienna. And behind that glass, between coffee cups and candlelight, hope found a new home. The cafe was quiet that evening. Rain drifted down the windows in thin silver lines, turning the streetlights into soft halos of gold. Inside, the smell of wet pavement and coffee beans mingled like a familiar lullaby. Elias had gone upstairs to help Frau Kappel move some old boxes from storage. Maren waited at their usual table, tracing circles on her cup, humming to the rhythm of the rain. When she grew curious, she followed him to the small attic above the cafe, a low-ceilinged room filled with dust, forgotten paintings, and stacks of yellowed paper. She picked up one box, marked "Old Sketches." Inside were pages of Elias's early drawings, rough, shy, full of emotion. At the bottom, she found an envelope. It was unsealed. The paper was aged, the ink faded. On the front, it said only, "For Clara." Maren hesitated, but her fingers trembled with curiosity. She opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, short, fragile, and heartbreakingly sincere. "My dearest Clara. If you are reading this, it means I never found the right words when it mattered. You were the one who saw color in me when I thought I was gray. And even now, after everything, I still find you in the quiet corners of my art. I hope your laughter fills other rooms now. I hope you are happy. That's all I ever wanted. Elias." Maren stood there for a long moment, the rain whispering against the roof. She could almost feel his past in the air, the ache of goodbye, the weight of something once beautiful. When Elias came back, wiping dust from his hands, he stopped when he saw her holding the letter. His face softened, not with anger, but with memory. "I didn't mean to read it," she said quietly. "It was just there." He nodded slowly, sitting beside her. "It's all right. That was, a long time ago." "Who was she?" He took a deep breath. "A painter. We met before the war. She left Vienna when things got difficult. I never saw her again." Maren folded the letter gently, setting it on the table. "You loved her." "I thought I did," he said. Then he looked at her, his eyes steady and full of light. "But love, I've learned, isn't just about who inspired your past. It's about who gives your silence meaning now." Outside, the rain softened into mist. The world felt smaller, safer. Maren reached out and took his hand. "Then promise me something," she whispered. "That when you write again, letters, poems, sketches, you'll let them belong to this moment. To now." Elias smiled faintly. "To us." "To now," she repeated, squeezing his hand. "Because that's where we both finally live." They sat there in the quiet attic, surrounded by forgotten art and unspoken goodbyes, two souls learning that love isn't always about erasing the past, but making peace with it. The cafe's clock chimed softly downstairs, and the sound drifted upward like a blessing, steady, kind, eternal. Vienna changed the way it breathed when autumn arrived. The streets smelled of roasted chestnuts and damp leaves. The cafe's doorbell jingled more often as people sought warmth inside, shaking rain from their coats. Candles returned to every table, their small flames fluttering like quiet hearts. Elias and Marin sat by the window as usual, but the light had shifted, less golden now, more amber, deeper. The kind of light that made everything look softer, more tender. Elias was sketching the falling leaves outside, tracing how they spun and fluttered like dancers with nowhere particular to land. Marin sipped her cinnamon coffee, her notebook closed beside her. "You've been quiet lately," he said gently, not looking up from his drawing. She smiled faintly. "Quiet feels right lately. It's a good season for silence." He nodded. "You've been writing less." She hesitated. "Sometimes, I think silence says more than poems can." He finally looked up, studying her expression, calm, distant, but not unhappy. There was something in her eyes, though, a flicker of thought she wasn't ready to share. The cafe door opened, and a gust of crisp air swept through. Frau Kappel brought out slices of apple strudel, the sugar melting in the heat of the plates. She winked at them. "Autumn makes people honest," she said. "Maybe that's why it's my favorite season." Marin laughed softly. "Honest how?" "Because when it's cold," Frau Kappel said, "people stop pretending they're not lonely." She walked away humming, and her words hung in the air like the scent of cinnamon and rain. Later, as the day dimmed, Elias packed up his sketches, but Marin stayed seated. Outside, the first leaf fell against the window, a single amber curl that stuck there for a moment before sliding down. Marin whispered, "It's strange, isn't it? How something has to fall to remind us it once belonged to a tree." Elias reached for her hand. "Maybe falling isn't always losing. Maybe it's just, moving on." The streetlights flickered on, one by one, and the cafe glowed softly in the reflection of the glass. They sat in that golden stillness, two people learning how to love even in the changing seasons. The cafe didn't speak, but if it could, it might have said, "Every season leaves something beautiful behind." That evening, the rain didn't stop. It came down steady and silver, like a curtain between the world and everything that could hurt it. The cobblestones outside glistened under the streetlights, and the cafe glowed like a lantern in the mist. Inside, only a handful of people remained, travelers drying their coats, lovers whispering near the back, and Frau Kappel polishing glasses behind the counter. Elias sat by the window, sketchbook open but untouched. Marin stood by the door, watching the rain trail down the glass like slow tears. "You should stay," he said. "The streets are cold tonight." She smiled softly. "I wasn't planning to leave." Just then, from across the street, came a sound, faint but clear. A violin. A young musician stood beneath an awning, his hat at his feet, bow gliding gently across the strings. The melody floated through the rain, soft and fragile, yet it carried like a heartbeat. The cafe grew still. Even Frau Kappel paused mid-motion, listening. Marin turned to Elias. "He's playing in the rain." Elias closed his sketchbook and stood beside her. "Then we should listen properly." They stepped outside beneath the cafe's awning, the cold air brushing against their faces. The violinist smiled faintly when he saw them, but never stopped playing. His song was simple, a waltz, perhaps, but slower, like something remembered from a dream. The rain kept falling, steady and graceful, tapping softly against the pavement. Elias slipped his arm around Marin's shoulders, and she leaned closer without a word. For a long time, they just stood there, the world quiet except for music and rain. When the violinist finished, Marin clapped softly, and Elias nodded in quiet gratitude. The musician bowed, his hair dripping with rainwater. "Music sounds truer when it's shared," he said with a shy grin before walking away into the mist. Back inside, Marin whispered, "Do you ever think some moments are too beautiful to last?" Elias poured her another cup of coffee. "That's what makes them beautiful," he said. "They happen once, and that's enough." She smiled, staring into the steam rising from her cup. "Then maybe tonight is enough." He reached across the table, touching her hand lightly. "Maybe tonight is everything." Outside, the violin's echo lingered faintly in the rain, soft, slow, eternal, like a promise whispered to the night itself. The idea came one late afternoon, when the cafe smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke, and the world outside felt wrapped in amber light. Marin sat by the window, her fingers stained with ink. A blank page rested in front of her, and she had been staring at it for almost an hour. Elias was nearby, sketching quietly, the sound of his pencil soft against the paper. Finally, she said, "Do you ever wonder what we'll remember about this? About now?" He looked up, smiling faintly. "All of it, I hope. The light. The smell of coffee. You trying to read poems aloud while I draw crooked tables." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "No, I mean, what if memory fades? What if we forget the small things?" Elias thought for a moment. "Then we should write them down." That was how it began. Marin tore a page from her notebook and wrote at the top, "For the days we'll forget." Her first letter was simple. "Dear future. I don't know who we'll become. Maybe we'll still be here, maybe not. But I hope we're still kind, to ourselves, and to the people who once sat beside us and made us laugh for no reason." When she finished, she folded the letter and tucked it inside an old cookie tin Frau Kappel gave her. Elias watched her, curious. "Are you writing to the future?" She nodded. "We should both write. And someday, maybe someone will find these and know that once, in this small cafe, two people loved the world quietly." So Elias joined her. His letters were short sketches with words written in the margins: a steaming cup, a rain-wet window, a woman smiling softly at the corner table. Over the next few weeks, the tin filled with folded pages. Some were serious. Some were playful. One of Marin's letters simply read, "Remember to dance, even if the music is just in your head." Another from Elias said, "If you ever doubt yourself, go back to the cafe." The walls remember laughter. They didn't tell anyone else. It became their secret, a ritual of paper and ink, hope and time. On the first night of October, as the last customer left and the candles burned low, Marin whispered, "Maybe love is just this, writing to a future we'll never see, hoping it remembers how we felt." Elias took her hand. "Then let's keep writing. Even if the cafe forgets, maybe the letters won't." They sealed the tin and hid it behind a loose brick near the window, a time capsule of quiet hearts and gentle days. Outside, the rain had stopped, and a thin crescent moon shone over the city. For the first time in a long while, both of them felt that even if time kept moving, something of them, their laughter, their kindness, their love, would always stay behind, folded between the pages of the cafe's endless story. Winter came softly that year, as if the city didn't want to wake anyone. The first snow fell just before dawn, a slow, delicate drift that covered Vienna in a blanket of white. By the time the cafe opened, the streets were nearly silent, the usual rhythm of wheels and footsteps replaced by the gentle hush of snowflakes landing on stone. Elias was the first to arrive. He stood outside for a long time, watching the snow gather on the cafe's awning, tracing the air with his breath. When he finally stepped inside, the warmth hit him like a memory. The cafe looked different now, softer. The candles burned lower, the light gentler, and the air smelled faintly of vanilla and smoke. Frau Kappel hummed as she placed a wreath of pine and berries near the counter. "Winter makes even silence sound holy," she said when Elias greeted her. He smiled. "It does." When Maren arrived, her cheeks were red from the cold, her hair dusted with tiny flakes that melted as soon as she stepped inside. She carried 2 envelopes in her hand. "More letters?" Elias asked. She nodded. "For us. For the future. And maybe for the snow." They sat at their table by the window. Outside, everything moved in slow motion, children throwing soft handfuls of snow, a dog bounding through the drifts, a baker sweeping the steps of his shop. Maren pressed her palms around her cup, warming her fingers. "Do you ever think," she said softly, "that winter makes people honest?" Elias smiled faintly. "How so?" "Because when the world goes quiet," she said, "we finally hear what we've been avoiding." He looked at her for a long moment. "And what do you hear?" She hesitated. Then, barely above a whisper, "Time. Passing." Elias reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. "Then let's not waste it." She smiled, but there was something distant in her eyes, something fragile, like frost on glass. The clock ticked softly. Outside, a carriage passed, its wheels leaving slow curves in the snow. Inside, they said little else, but their silence felt full, not empty, not cold. Just real. Elias took out his sketchbook. "Stay still," he said gently. "I want to draw this, the way winter looks on you." Maren laughed quietly. "That sounds dramatic." He grinned. "It's honest." She tilted her head, pretending to be serious. "Then make me look like I belong in the snow." "You already do." He began sketching. She sat still, hands wrapped around her cup, her breath fogging the window. Outside, snow kept falling, soft, patient, endless. And inside, the cafe, their cafe, breathed quietly, keeping their warmth alive against the cold world beyond. The snow kept falling. For days, Vienna seemed to sleep under it. Even the cafe grew quieter, fewer visitors, slower voices, longer pauses between laughter. One evening, the piano in the corner stood uncovered for the first time in months. Frau Kappel had polished it, hoping someone might play, but no one ever did. Until that night. Elias came in early, his scarf still damp from the cold. The cafe was nearly empty, just the faint hum of the heater and the whisper of snow against the window. He noticed something resting on the piano, a small, folded sheet of paper. When he opened it, he found a handwritten melody. The title at the top read, "For When Words Are Too Small." Below it, in Marin's familiar handwriting, were musical notes, simple, gentle, like a lullaby. Elias looked around. Marin wasn't there yet. He sat at the piano and ran his fingers lightly over the keys. Dust lifted in the candlelight. Then, hesitantly, he began to play. The first notes were soft, uneven, searching. But soon, the melody took shape. It was delicate, almost fragile, like something made of breath and memory. The cafe seemed to exhale with him. When the doorbell chimed, Marin stepped in, snow clinging to her coat. She froze when she heard the tune. Her eyes widened, a mix of surprise and something deeper. "You found it," she whispered. Elias looked up from the piano. "It was just lying here. Did you write it?" She nodded slowly. "A long time ago. Before I met you. I never played it for anyone." "Why?" She walked closer, her hands clasped. "Because it wasn't finished. It didn't have an ending." Elias smiled faintly, still pressing the keys gently. "Maybe it does now." He played again, slower this time. Marin stood beside him, listening. When he reached the final measure, the blank space where her notes had stopped, he hesitated. Then, instinctively, he added one more chord. A small, tender sound, incomplete but somehow whole. Marin closed her eyes. "That's it," she said softly. "That's how it was supposed to end." The two of them stood in silence. The cafe glowed in the dim golden light, the snow falling thicker outside. After a long pause, Marin said, "It's strange, isn't it? Sometimes you write something for the person you haven't met yet." Elias looked at her, his eyes gentle. "And sometimes you finish a song that was waiting for you." They both smiled, that quiet kind of smile that feels like forgiveness. When the song ended, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The cafe, warm and breathing around them, seemed to hold the last note in the air a little longer, as if it, too, didn't want it to end. By late February, the snow began to melt. It started slowly, thin trickles of water running down the cafe windows, icicles softening into glimmering droplets. The city still wore its winter hush, but beneath it, something new was stirring. The faint scent of earth. The distant call of birds. The quiet promise of change. Inside the cafe, Marin sat alone at their table, turning the cookie tin of letters in her hands. She hadn't opened it since autumn. Frau Kappel had found it while dusting and left it for her near the counter. When Elias arrived, brushing snow from his coat, she smiled faintly. "Look what came back to us." He recognized it instantly, the tin that held their words, their laughter, their hope. He sat beside her. "Maybe it's time," he said softly. They opened it together. The papers inside were slightly yellowed at the edges, the ink faded but still clear. Each letter was like a small echo of who they once were. Marin read one aloud. "Dear future, don't forget how beautiful ordinary days were." Elias chuckled softly. "That one was yours." She smiled. "You always liked the ordinary." He unfolded another letter, a small sketch of her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. Beneath it, he had written, "This is how warmth looks." Marin blinked back tears. "You drew this the morning it snowed for the first time." He nodded. "I remember. You said winter makes people honest." They sat quietly, reading through the letters, letting their past selves speak for them. Some made them laugh. Some made them ache. All of them reminded them how far they had come, not in miles, but in moments. Outside, the sunlight broke through for the first time in weeks. A single beam slipped across the floor and landed on their table, warm and golden. Marin closed the tin. "Maybe we should bury it again. Somewhere the cafe can keep it safe." Elias smiled. "No. Let's keep it this time. For the next winter." They watched as people began walking past the windows again, children with red scarves, lovers holding hands, vendors calling out in the thawing air. The city, like their hearts, was waking up. Marin looked at Elias and whispered, "It's coming back, isn't it? The color." He nodded. "It always does." The cafe's doorbell chimed softly as someone entered, bringing with them a gust of fresh, warmer air. For a moment, it felt like the world exhaled. And just like that, in the gentle quiet of melting snow, they both realized that love, like spring, doesn't arrive all at once. It returns slowly. Patiently. But it always finds its way home. March arrived with the soft rhythm of rain. The cafe's windows, once fogged by winter breath, now reflected puddles and clouds drifting lazily across the Vienna sky. The air smelled of wet stone and coffee, that same familiar scent that had greeted the city for decades. Elias unlocked the cafe door early that morning, as he always did. His movements had slowed a little over the years, but his hands still remembered every hinge and drawer. The cafe was quieter now, but alive in its own way, in the hum of the espresso machine, the gentle chatter of returning regulars, the sound of the bell that had rung through generations. Marin arrived soon after, carrying a vase of tulips wrapped in brown paper. She placed them by the window, where the first light of day always fell. "They were growing wild near the river," she said. "It felt wrong not to bring them here." Elias smiled. "The cafe looks younger already." As the morning wore on, a pair of new faces appeared outside, a young man and woman, both carrying sketchbooks under their arms. They hesitated at the door, whispering and laughing in the way new lovers do when unsure if they belong somewhere. Finally, the girl pushed the door open. The bell chimed softly. "Welcome," Marin said warmly. "Come in out of the rain." They took a seat near the window, the same table where, years ago, Elias had once drawn his first portrait of Marin. The young man noticed the light there, how it fell across her face just right, and began sketching as she stirred her coffee. Elias watched them quietly. There was something in the boy's posture, the awkwardness, the sincerity, that reminded him of himself long ago. When he brought over their cups, the young woman looked up and said, "This place, it feels different. Like it remembers things." Elias chuckled softly. "It does," he said. "It remembers everyone who's ever waited here." The girl smiled. "That's a beautiful thought." After they left, Marin found a napkin on the table, a quick pencil sketch of the cafe's window, with the tulips in the corner. Beneath it, the young artist had written, Some places never close. They just keep listening. She showed it to Elias. He smiled faintly, eyes misty. He understands, he said. Just like we did. Outside, the rain had stopped. The street glistened like silver. The tulips in the vase tilted slightly toward the window, as if reaching for the light. The cafe, their old, gentle witness, had begun a new story. And though Elias and Maren said nothing, they both felt the same quiet truth rising in their hearts. The world moves on, but love leaves echoes strong enough to start again. The first truly warm day of spring arrived without warning. The cafe's doors were propped open, letting in a soft breeze that carried the sound of street musicians and the distant chatter of market-goers. The city was alive again. After months of muted grays, Vienna had returned to color. Maren was arranging pastries behind the counter when she heard a strange noise, a dull, hollow thump from the corner near the old piano. It had sat untouched for years, covered with dust and coffee-stained sheet music. Elias looked up from wiping the tables. "Did you hear that?" She nodded. "The piano." They walked over, half expecting a mouse. But instead, they found the young artist from a few days ago, Lucas, standing sheepishly beside the open lid. "Oh. I didn't mean to startle you," he said. "I was just curious. I saw the keys and wondered if it still worked." Maren smiled kindly. "It hasn't been played in a long time." "Not since," she paused, her eyes softening. "Well, not since the cafe's quieter days." Lucas pressed a key. It let out a faint, hesitant note. Then another. Soon, a small melody began to form, broken, uneven, but warm. Elias stood by, listening. His heart tightened. He knew that tune. Maren realized it too. "Elias," she whispered. "That's your song." Years ago, when the cafe had been their evening world, when she painted and he sketched by candlelight, Elias used to hum that same melody while closing up. He never wrote it down, but it had become their sound. "How did you?" Elias asked, astonished. Lucas shrugged, embarrassed. "I don't know. It just came to me. I thought it was something old." Maren exchanged a look with Elias, half wonder, half disbelief. "It is something old," she said softly. "But it found you." Lucas smiled shyly. "Then maybe it wanted to be played again." He sat down fully at the piano, fingers trembling, and began to play. The notes stumbled at first but soon flowed like sunlight over water. Each chord seemed to awaken something in the air, a memory, a heartbeat, a whisper of long-ago evenings. Customers began to quiet. The hum of the espresso machine softened. Even the tulips near the window seemed to stand a little taller, listening. When Lucas finished, there was a pause, that sacred silence that comes only after something true. Elias whispered, "You've given the cafe its voice back." Maren nodded, her eyes bright. "And maybe us, too." The young man smiled, unaware of the weight his small act carried. He just saw two old people smiling at a melody. But to them, it was more, a circle closing, a love remembered through sound. Later, when the cafe emptied and twilight fell across the street, Maren placed a small note on the piano. "Play whenever you wish. The cafe remembers." That night, long after closing, Elias stood by the door listening to the faint echo of that song lingering in the rafters. For the first time in years, he felt young again. The rain came suddenly that evening, not the gentle drizzle of early spring, but a full downpour, the kind that made the cafe's windows tremble and its lamps glow softer. Inside, people huddled closer to the warmth, the smell of coffee rich and comforting. Elias watched as raindrops streaked down the glass like lines on a watercolor painting. Marin sat near the window, quietly knitting, her face caught in the golden lamplight. Lucas had returned again, sketchbook in hand. He'd been visiting almost every day now, always sitting at the same spot near the piano. He said it helped him think. That evening, he set his sketchbook aside and looked up at the wall behind the counter, a wide, uneven patch where the paint looked different. Was there something here before? He asked. Elias hesitated. Ah, that wall. Yes. There was a painting once. Long ago. What happened to it? Lucas asked. Elias sighed softly. It faded, or maybe it hid itself. Lucas tilted his head, studying the surface. Something about the way the light struck it caught his eye, faint brushstrokes beneath the plaster, like a ghost trying to breathe. Do you mind if I? Elias nodded. Go ahead. Lucas gently pressed against the wall. The outer layer of paint flaked away under his fingers, revealing color beneath, a muted swirl of blue and gold. He worked carefully, scraping just enough to see more. Slowly, a figure began to emerge, a woman sitting by a window, her hands cupped around a steaming cup. Marin froze. It was her. Not as she was now, older, wiser, softer, but as she had been 50 years ago, the day Elias had first painted her. Oh, Elias, she whispered, tears forming. You hid it here. He nodded slowly, voice trembling. It was the first painting I ever finished of you. I couldn't sell it. I couldn't hang it either. So I buried it in the wall, where it could stay with the cafe. Lucas stepped back, awe in his eyes. It's beautiful. Even after all this time. The colors glowed faintly in the lamplight, her smile, her eyes, the way the coffee steam blended with the morning light behind her. It was as if time itself had paused in that single moment of love. Outside, thunder rolled, and the rain poured harder, washing the streets clean. The cafe felt suspended between past and present, the ghosts of memory breathing alongside the living. Marin reached out and touched the edge of the painting. I remember that morning, she whispered. You said you wanted to paint the quiet between our words. Elias smiled. And you said, then you'll need a lot of paint. They both laughed softly, the sound like rain against glass. Lucas stood by, humbled. You too, you've turned this cafe into something more than a place. Marin nodded, her voice low but certain. It's not just ours anymore. It's everyone's who's ever loved enough to wait. That night, when the rain finally stopped, the street shimmered under the lamplight. The portrait, now fully uncovered, seemed almost alive, a window within a wall, a piece of time that refused to fade. And as the cafe lights dimmed for the night, Elias whispered to Marin, now it can watch over us, the way we once watched over it. Marin smiled, her hand finding his. Outside, a puddle caught their reflection, two figures in the warm glow of a cafe that, even after decades, never truly closed. The morning arrived golden and gentle, as if the city itself wanted to whisper goodbye. Elias woke early, his body weary but his mind unusually clear. The light outside stretched long across the wooden floorboards of their small apartment above the cafe. He listened, the familiar creak of the kettle, the distant hum of trams, the slow breathing of a city just waking. Downstairs, Marin was already at the counter, her silver hair tied back, arranging tulips, yellow this time. "Morning," she said with her usual quiet smile. "You slept late." Elias chuckled softly. "Did I? I must be slowing down." She poured him coffee, dark, rich, fragrant. "You've earned it." They sat together in the window seat, watching as sunlight fell on the street below. Children ran past with kites, laughter echoing against the old stone walls. Somewhere, a violinist played a soft waltz. The cafe had changed over the years, new faces, new chairs, even a few modern lamps, but its soul had not. The portrait Lucas uncovered still hung on the back wall, restored carefully and framed. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "For those who wait, love always returns." Lucas had insisted on the words. He now managed the cafe with quiet reverence, keeping the same rhythm Elias had taught him: open early, close late, never rush a story. Marin turned to Elias. "It feels different today." He nodded, eyes soft. "Yes. Like the cafe is breathing slower." A hush lingered between them. Not sadness, just a deep, steady peace. Around noon, a young couple came in, travelers, maybe students, and asked about the painting. Marin told them the story, the artist who fell in love with the woman he painted, the letters they wrote, the winters they endured. The girl listened, eyes shining. "That's so beautiful," she said. "Did they ever leave Vienna?" Marin smiled faintly. "No. They didn't have to. Everything they needed was already here." After the couple left, Elias stood by the door, his hand on the old brass handle. The cafe's bell chimed softly in the wind. He looked around, at the chairs worn smooth by years, at the piano that still carried their song, at the golden light pooling across the counter. "I think it's time," he whispered. Marin turned. "Time for what?" He smiled gently. "For the cafe to keep watching, without us." She reached for his hand, trembling but sure. "Then we'll leave it the light." That evening, as the sun set over Vienna, the cafe glowed, every lamp lit, every window reflecting the soft fire of dusk. Elias locked the door one last time, then turned to Marin. "You know," he said softly, "we never really closed." Marin smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We never will." As night fell, the lights in the cafe dimmed one by one, until only the portrait remained illuminated. The painted Marin smiled eternally from the wall, her eyes still full of life. And outside, the rain began again, gentle, rhythmic, almost like applause. The city slept. The cafe listened. And somewhere between them, love stayed, warm, unending, like the glow of a candle that never truly goes out. A week passed. The spring air had grown softer, warmer. The tulips in the window had begun to lean toward the sunlight, their petals open and bright. Lucas stood behind the counter early one morning, before the city had fully woken. The cafe felt quieter than usual, not empty, but listening. He could still feel the echoes of Elias and Marin everywhere, in the way the chairs were angled, in the smell of roasted beans, in the faint tune that seemed to hum from the piano whenever he walked by. He was cleaning the lower shelf when his hand brushed against something small and wooden, a thin board nailed beneath the counter. Curious, he pried it loose carefully. Behind it, wrapped in old brown paper, was an envelope. It was sealed with wax, marked only by 2 words. For whoever keeps the light. Lucas's breath caught. His hands trembled slightly as he broke the seal. Inside was a single folded letter, written in Elias's familiar, looping handwriting. He read. To the one who finds this. If you're reading, it means the cafe is still alive. Thank you. This place was never about coffee or art or business. It was about time, the kind that lingers, the kind that listens. We built it for people who needed somewhere quiet enough to hear their own hearts. If you ever wonder what to do next, keep the light warm. Don't change too much. Add your story to the walls, but never erase ours. And when someone sits alone by the window, watching the rain, bring them coffee, not questions. Some souls just need a place to rest a while. We called it the cafe that never closed, not because the doors stayed open, but because love doesn't know how to lock itself away. So keep it open, even when you're gone. E. Lucas read the letter twice. Then again. Each line sank deeper than the last. He folded it carefully and placed it in a small glass frame, setting it on the window ledge where morning light poured through. The words shimmered faintly in the sun, like gold dust over ink. That day, when customers came in, many paused to read the letter. Some smiled. Some wiped away quiet tears. One woman whispered, I feel like he's still here. Lucas nodded. He is. By evening, the cafe was filled with soft music and quiet laughter. Someone played the piano again, that same forgotten tune that had once belonged to Elias and Marin. Outside, the rain began to fall, tapping lightly against the glass. Lucas turned the lights low, just the way Elias used to, and whispered to himself. The light's still warm, old friend. And in the glow of that simple truth, the cafe that never closed lived on, not as a building, but as a promise. Years passed. Vienna changed in ways both quiet and immense. The trams grew sleeker, the buildings brighter, the rhythm of the city quicker. But on the corner of a narrow cobblestone street, beneath a sign weathered smooth by decades of sun and snow, the cafe still stood. The tulips still bloomed in the window every spring. The old bell above the door still chimed the same soft note when someone entered. And behind the counter, where laughter always lived, Lucas's daughter, Anna, now worked the mornings. She had her father's calm and her grandfather's hands. Though she'd never met Elias or Marin, she felt as though she knew them. Their faces watched over her from the portrait on the back wall, the woman with eyes full of light, the man whose brushstrokes still seemed to hum with warmth. Every so often, a tourist would ask, "Why do you call it the cafe that never closed?" Anna would smile and gesture toward the letter in the window, the one Lucas had framed years ago. The ink had faded to brown, but the words still shone through the glass. We called it the cafe that never closed, not because the doors stayed open, but because love doesn't know how to lock itself away. People always read it twice. Some took photos. A few left quietly, as if carrying something invisible and precious in their hearts. One rainy evening, a young writer came in, tired, lost, soaked through from the storm. He sat by the window and ordered a single cup of coffee. For a long time, he said nothing. He just stared out into the rain, like he was listening for something. Anna recognized the look. She brought him his cup and, without a word, placed a small napkin beside it. On the napkin, she had written, "You're safe here." The man smiled faintly. "Thank you." Hours later, as the storm quieted, he began to write, page after page, words flowing like rainwater through open streets. He stayed until closing time, though the cafe never really closed. When he left, he whispered, "This place feels alive." Anna smiled softly. "It is." After he was gone, she wiped the table and found his napkin folded beneath the cup. On it, he had written back, "Some stories never end. They just change storytellers." Outside, the rain had stopped. The reflection of the cafe shimmered in the puddles, the same warm glow that had once fallen over Elias and Marin, then Lucas, and now Anna. From the street, passers-by could see the golden light, the framed letter, the portrait smiling gently through the years. Inside, everything seemed to hum with the same soft rhythm, love, memory, and the quiet that holds them both. And though night came, the cafe never truly darkened. Because light, real light, isn't in the lamps or the windows. It's in the people who keep it burning.